Welcome everyone to this CPG webinar for administrators. Today's topic is an overview of the Church Insurance Agency's cyber liability and malicious attack coverage. I'm happy to welcome today's presenter, Paul Stevens, Vice President for Client Management, Marketing, and Risk Management Services. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Glad to be here.
I want to let everyone know too that the PDF copy of the deck that you're going to see, the presentation, is available for download in the handout section. So if you want to download this presentation to have with you as we go through it, you can do that. Okay, Paul, I am going to hand this over to you.
All right, thanks, Bob. And Bob, can you pull up the presentation, please? There we go. All right, everybody. Again, Paul Stevens with Church Insurance Agency Corporation. Glad to be here. It's a beautiful day in Nashville, Tennessee, and I hope it's beautiful wherever you are today. We're going to talk today about two topics and have plenty of time for questions and answers and conversation. The two topics we'll cover today are cyber liability coverage, malicious attack coverage. Now, both of these are interesting coverages. They are not coverages that are provided directly by Church Insurance Company. They're specialty coverages where we have found product partners that do a great job in the niche. These are both handled through Lloyd's of London. Both of these coverages that we speak about today is no charge to you. They are policies that Church Insurance buys on behalf of the church, and anyone who participates in is insured in our program automatically receives coverage for cyber liability and malicious attack. So without further ado, we'll go to the next slide. And we can turn it one more. All right, so we'll start with cyber liability. This is a very hot topic lately. We hear about it ourselves from claims and insureds. We also all hear about it from time to time through the media, big companies that are hacked. We've seen it where pipelines get hacked and it creates supply and demand issues. So cyber is a very hot topic, a very volatile line of coverage. So it's important that we have the coverage, and we're glad to be able to provide it through Lloyd's of London. So let's talk about two components of cyber liability just to set our level. The policy provides both first-party and third-party insurance for covered cyber losses. So a first-party coverage would be losses to your own data, lost income, harm to your institution because someone has hacked you, breached your firewall, and become a bad actor within your system. First-party coverage. Third-party coverage is a liability coverage, and that's the liability that you have for third parties arising from a data breach or cyber attack. So think of that as somehow you disseminate information that you shouldn't, or you forward an email that leads to a huge hack. So that would apply to outside parties as well. So you need third-party coverage as well as first-party coverage. So we'll go ahead and turn the slide, Bob, and drill down. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is the third-party coverage. This is where we're responsible for the issue, and this is a liability coverage. The policy breaks out subsets of this, and we're going to cover these a bit. And any questions you have, let's see them or hear them in the chat, or you can ask them, and Bob will feed them to me. So again, the liability coverage, it applies to third parties, folks who you harm. Multimedia liability claim. You can see the limit and you can see the deductible. What is a multimedia liability claim? This example of you disseminate information that you shouldn't have. So for example, you give away everyone's credit card number or identifiable information that could lead to a credit breach, but you disseminate information that you shouldn't have. The policy would respond to that. There's up to $250,000 to handle that, subject to a $1,000 claim deductible. Underneath that is security and privacy liability. Again, $250,000 limit. This is a failure to safeguard. You were hacked and infected by others, and it's the result of not properly safeguarding your system. Again, there's coverage for it, up to $250,000 limit, subject to the deductible that you see on the screen. We also have privacy regulatory defense. So it's not bad enough that you've caused a breach and that you have a liability exposure to a third party. You also have a liability exposure to regulatory agencies in the form of fines and awards. So they'll come in and say, okay, we're going to fine you $10,000 because this happened, or it could be whatever amount it is, but that's a one I see fairly often. The policy set up to pay those fines and awards on your behalf, up to $250,000, subject to the deductible of $1,000 per claim. We've got the PCI DSS liability claim. So what does it mean? It's the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And this is a widely accepted set of policies and procedures that's intended to optimize the security of credit, debit, and cash card transactions and protects cardholders against misuse of their personal information. So again, you're found to have been lacking in your efforts of living up to the PCI DSS. Claim is filed. Policy would provide up to $250,000 on your behalf, again, subject to the $1,000 deductible. So that's a summation of the third party coverages. So the liability coverages, liability that you're responsible for due to some sort of breach or hack that originated with you or was caused by you or was furthered by you. And we can go ahead and move to the next page then, Bob. Now we get into the non-liability highlights. Did we miss a page? Oh, okay, I'm in the right place. Thanks, Bob. We get into non-liability limits. So these are what we call first-party claims. So these are claims you didn't cause it, you were just the victim of it. So this is what we see more often than not. And we'll talk about some of these. We're also going to talk about some risk management tips around this to hopefully eliminate or reduce the frequency of these types of losses. First one we'll talk about is the breach response cost. Again, it's a $250,000 limit, subject to a $1,000 deductible. This is legal and public relations expenses. It's proactive, meaning that we're going to have public relations folks that are going to help you with regard to the brand. They're going to also get into voluntary notifications. So we get into voluntary notifications. This is a notification that isn't required by law, but that is something that we want to do from a public relations standpoint. So we're not required to do it, but it's the right thing to do. And this can get very expensive. I was telling Bob before we started today that I was just reviewing all of our loss data, and I saw a pretty big claim out there. It was the biggest one we've seen so far, and it was for $104,000. So much less than our limit, but still a significant claim. And when I drilled down into it, most of the costs associated with that claim were the cost to notify folks that there had been a breach. So there wasn't, this was one of those ransom extortion situations. There was no ransom paid. What was paid that got north of $100,000 was notification to everyone impacted. And that can be voluntary or it can be required. Proactive privacy breach response, that's an interesting component of this policy. What it says is that there's up to $250,000 of coverage for public relations prior to the release of adverse media information. So the church there's a hack that happens that impacts the church, word gets out, the church or others at the diocese maybe, or just general public realizes, hey, this is going to be on the news tomorrow morning and we want to get in front of it, or it's going to be in the papers in the next day or two and we want to get in front of it. The proactive privacy breach response cost sublimit is going to pay for those public relations activities prior to the adverse relations adverse release of the information. So an interesting component, again, not required by law, but something that's more of a public relations aspect of the policy. We have to think in terms of, for lack of a better word, the brand. So if the church is St. Stephen's, and all of a sudden we're known as the folks who got hacked and impacted the community, we want to get ahead of that with PR and make sure that we can rehabilitate the brand as soon and as best as possible. And we'll go to the next slide. Continuing with the non-liability coverages, again, these are first party, so you didn't cause the breach, but you were the victim of the breach. Brand guard, up to $250,000. This covers lost revenue due to adverse media. So again, if we think about the concept of the breach has happened, we've notified everybody, the claims have been paid. However, now we notice that our revenue's off because our brand's been damaged. The brand guard would pay that lost revenue that is the direct result of the adverse media attention. It has a waiting period of 2 weeks, and then it has a coverage period of 6 months. So it's pretty broad. I'm not sure that I've seen a lot of activity on this particular aspect of the policy, but it's certainly something that we're glad to have. And when we do need it, we're glad that it's there. Next, we get network asset protection. So this is the actual hardware or software that can be damaged. Again, someone breaches into your system and damages your hardware and software, can be very expensive. Limit is $250,000, and there is a $1,000 claim and a short waiting period. Cyber extortion. This is the one we hear about a lot, also known as ransomware. Again, similar limit, $250,000, $1,000 per claim. Most of the time when I see these extortion cases, I don't see where a ransom is paid. Generally, what the experts that we work with through Lloyd's of London are able to do is to unhack the hack and get control of your data. And then most of the costs that I have seen, again, associated with this is notifying folks that the hack occurred. That can get very expensive depending on how many people are impacted. And then lastly on this page is cyber crime, computer fraud, things like that. You'll notice the limit's much less. It's $25,000. This is a very volatile piece of the policy. We see this from time to time, and I was looking at the losses earlier, like I said, and I did see this a number of times across the denomination. So this can be tied to one of the 6 ways that folks who are bad actors infiltrate us. And I want to spend a little time just talking about that. So ransomware, that's what we're talking about. That can be, hey, I got an email. It looks like it's from Father Smith, but I didn't look real close at that email address it came from. And now, and I clicked on it, and it was a document. And now my screen is blue, and I'm getting a message that tells me my material's all being held ransom, and they need $25,000 or they're going to destroy it. So that's the typical ransomware. It usually comes in through a phishing email. So again, we're going to talk about that a couple times today, but this is the first time we're going to mention it. But be very careful with phishing emails. You won't even know it's a phishing email a lot of times. It can look very legitimate. They can recreate logos. They can spoof the email address. So when in doubt, one of the best tools ever invented was the telephone. So if you ever get a suspicious email, best thing you can do for yourself is don't respond to the email. Call that person and say, hey, I just got a suspicious email from you. Is this legitimate? And most of the time, the answer is going to be, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, it's not legitimate. Just a side note to that, one of the units that I'm part of here at Church Insurance does outbound calls to our policyholders just to review their coverage and make sure that everything on the policy is correct and up to date. It's a policy service type of situation. And I've noticed in the last year that when the team reports to me how it's going, they said, yeah, having some folks who, when we call, say, how do I know you're you? And send me an email, let me respond to you before I talk to you. And I'm very pleased to see that because it shows that folks are taking this seriously and they're like, I haven't heard from Church Insurance necessarily in a year or two about updates on my policy. I'm not sure if this is legitimate. I know about this cyber liability going on. I'm going to be double sure and make them call me or make them send me an email or some way to verify that who's calling me or emailing me is who they say they are. So I've been glad to see that. So again, I want to get back to some of the big 6 items that get us into liability problems with cyber. So we talk about ransomware. We talked earlier about credit cards under the PCI DSS situation. So again, to the situation where you are maintaining a database of credit cards, which is somewhat unusual. Most of the time when I'm speaking with folks at the church, they tell me that that's outsourced, which is good because it moves the liability from you to whoever the credit card vendor is. But to the extent that you're involved with credit cards, you gotta be very careful with that. Don't want to write credit card numbers down anywhere. You really don't want to have a database of credit card numbers anywhere. Again, the vendor is usually the best way, unless you're heavily encrypted and really on top of what you're doing. You want to probably outsource credit card. Mobile device security. At CPG, we've taken this very seriously for probably at least a decade. And this is the simple task of securing your machine, your laptop, your iPad, your phone, your cell phone, making sure you have very good passwords, that you're updating those passwords. Maybe you have two-point verification before you sign in, things like that. But mobile device security is a big deal. Folks still lose laptops, and it creates a big situation. A lot of times, if you lose the wrong laptop, you're going to get pulled into a cyber liability situation where you're required to notify everyone. So it can get very big, very quick. Phishing. Again, that's how we get into ransomware, but phishing comes in many flavors. The most popular phishing scam that we see is what is known in the industry as the CEO scam. And what this is that this is the CEO, or in our case, it might be a bishop or the rector, sends an email and says very quietly, I need you to transfer $10,000 right away today. I'll explain later. And it all looks very legitimate. And we get folks that do that. I just saw one, and that falls under cyber crime, 25,000. I just saw one where someone had a version of the CEO scam, which was called what we call the contractor scam, where the church was doing business with a contractor, but then someone out there who's a bad actor impersonates the contractor and sends an invoice. The invoice looks perfectly legitimate, and there's a big project going on with this contractor, and the church pays the invoice. Later, when the actual contractor starts to invoice them, they say, wait, I already paid. And the contractor's like, no. And when they get to the bottom of it, they realize they've transferred $62,000 to a bad actor impersonating their contractor. So again, the key to all of these phishing scams generally is that someone's impersonating someone else. That's the first piece. They're asking for funds. A lot of times they're building in a sense of urgency, which can really play well in a church. This is Bishop Smith. I'm at the hospital. I need $5,000 transferred to this account immediately to take care of whatever it is. And someone doesn't kick the tires on that and sends that money. So you got to be very careful about the phishing scam. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the basic one, and I never really thought about it until I went to a seminar on cyber liability, and they said one of the biggest ways that folks are breached is lack of a clean desk. And I thought, what is that? And then I started thinking about it. And I've seen some training through CPG that we're involved in right now that's pretty extensive, where we are viewing videos of how folks do this. And one of the things they're able to do is they can get a password off your desk. They can get documents off your desk. They could say, oh, look, they're doing business with ABC Roofing Company, and there's some letterhead right on their desk. And take that and create, a forged copy and try to perpetrate some sort of fraud on you as far as cyber crime. So those are the big 6 you want to think about: ransomware, credit cards, mobile device security, phishing, the email scam, CEO, contractor, and the clean desk. So the key, I know this is hard to do for most of us, try to keep that desk clean. Try to make sure anything that's password related is locked up. Make sure you're obviously not post-it notes on your computer with your password, things like that. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think anybody's doing that anymore. That was something back in the 90s when we were new to passwords. So hopefully that's helpful. And then Bob, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, so we've covered cyber liability at a high level and drilled down into some of the risk management practices that will best serve you. I want to pivot now to the other coverage that, again, not something that's directly insured by church insurance. It's through a product partner with our relationship through Lloyd's of London. You don't pay for it. It's something the church insurance company pays for on your behalf. As long as you're insured with church insurance, you have this coverage, and it's known as malicious attack coverage, also known as active shooter coverage. So we'll go ahead and turn the slide. Malicious attack coverage for an event that occurs during the policy period and meets all of these components. It involves the use of a vehicle, an explosive device, or any handheld weapon. It's intended to harm another person or group of persons. It's carried out or attempted by any person or group of persons acting alone or on behalf of or in connection with any organization, and it results in bodily injury of any person or physical loss of or damage to or destruction of tangible property. So we're going to drill down into this a little bit to clarify and get an understanding. So we'll go to the next slide, Bob. All right, so the highlights of the program. It automatically included, if you're a package policy holder with us, you automatically get this, as I said. It provides $10 million per occurrence with a matching annual aggregate, including physical loss, physical damage, and business interruption. So when we look at this, we say, okay, if it met the criteria we saw on the page before of how this was done and what the result was, this policy is going to respond up to this limit. There's some very interesting pieces of this. The first one I want to talk about is crisis management and public relations expenses. Provides up to $250,000 for that. So this is something you won't find in a typical liability policy. Liability policies are written to basically settle claims and pay legal defense. What this is doing is going a little further, and it's doing some proactive things that are reasonable if you think about it. If we have a horrible event happen at one of our churches and it hits the press, we're going to want to hire a public relations firm to do the best job possible to re-establish and rehabilitate, for lack of a better word, the brand of the church. We are also likely going to need to look at additional security expenses. Now that something's happened, churches are going to rethink that, and they may have to add some resources, which can get expensive. So we've got $250,000 sublimit for that. And lastly, under this piece, we have $250,000 counseling expenses. So you can imagine if we have a horrible thing happen at one of our insured locations, and a lot of folks are involved, we're going to have a lot of mental health needs. We're going to have employees, volunteers, people who were there, people who are somehow impacted by it, who are going to need counseling, and the policy provides that kind of response. So those three components are very unusual to a liability policy. Usually, if there's any counseling expenses to be paid, it's going to be paid out of the settlement. So what this does is it gives them settlement. It also provides these extra added components, which are very important. There's one other thing, it's not on the page, that I find very interesting and really a worthwhile purchase when we think about this policy. This policy will cover not only loss that occurs at your place, but it'll cover a loss that starts somewhere else. So I want to give you an example, and this is directed to business interruption, so loss of revenue, for example. Let's say we have a federal building that's located 1/2 mile away from our cathedral. The federal building is attacked. It's a malicious attack. It falls under the scope of the policy. But it didn't happen to our building. It happened to the federal building half-mile away. However, civil authority, the city, the police, they say, we've got to rope off this whole area. It's a crime scene. We just had a massive explosion in Nashville right after Christmas, and the whole 2nd Street was a crime scene for months, still barely coming back. So what's interesting about this policy, it says, hey, your building wasn't damaged, but now that civil authority has come in and said, you can't, we're roping off the area, no one can get to our church. No one can get to our school. We're losing revenue because of it. The beautiful thing about this policy, it would pay that lost revenue. So that's interesting, because usually when you have business loss revenue, it has to be direct physical loss to your building. What this policy is doing is expanding it to say, if the building's within 1 mile of your building and civil authority impacts you and you results in a loss of income, the policy's here to pay that. That's an interesting component. I've never seen it anywhere else. The other thing that's very interesting about this that you don't see is acts of civil authority. So all insurance policies have an exclusion that's standard, any that I've ever seen, that says we do not cover acts of civil authority. So let's wrap our head around what that means. Civil authority, an example of that would be someone barricades themselves in the church, the SWAT team comes out. After hours of negotiation, they realize the only answer is they need to drive their tank through the wall of our cathedral to gain access to the building. So it's an act of civil authority damaging the building. The commercial insurance market excludes that loss. There's no coverage for it. But this malicious attack coverage would cover it. So in that same scenario that would be excluded under general liability policies, malicious attack would catch it up and pay it. So what you have in that, just to run that scenario again, we have someone barricaded in our cathedral. It's determined to be a malicious attack and it triggers this coverage. The SWAT team runs their tank through the wall and damages the cathedral. We would have up to $10 million to pay that physical loss, physical damage. So those are the highlights of malicious attack. And I think we can turn the slide, Bob. Just want to share our contact information with you. We are available normal business hours. We follow the sun, so wherever you are, even in Hawaii, we're here till 4:30 p.m. We're here at 8 a.m. 800-293-3525 will get you to the church insurance companies. You'll either you can select billing, claims, or policy service. You have a regional field representative, vice president that serves your church. You can always reach out to them directly for any questions you might have. And this also gives you some information on the ARC, the Administrators Resource Center. And like Bob mentioned, that's where this webinar will live after today. And I think we can go ahead and turn the page and start any Q&A that we might have, Bob.
Just want to thank you, Paul, for the presentation and, at least in my opinion, some very valuable information.
Thank you.
We do actually have a couple questions, but before we get to those, I just want to remind people that you can ask questions in 2 ways. The first way is to submit a written question in the questions window of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will handle those in the order they come in. The second way is to ask a live question, and the way you do that is if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel, it should be on the left-hand side. You should see a little hand. This is very common whether you're using Zoom or any other product, and that is the raised hand icon. If you click on that, I can then see that you have a question you want to ask verbally. I will unmute you and ask you to go ahead and ask the question verbally or make the comment, and Paul will take that up. So at this point, I do not see any raised hands, but we do have a couple written questions, Paul.
Okay, great.
The first one, I am going to go up to this slide again. And the question is, are the 3 added components, the $250,000 components, are they part of or in addition to the $10 million?
They are part of.
Okay, so that's rolled up into the 10 million.
That's correct.
Okay, and a second question related to malicious attack coverage. You had mentioned civil authority, but does this also include martial law?
I'd have to look at the policy and ask the insured on that, or the insurance carrier on that. The martial law is not a term found in the policy, so I would hesitate to answer that one way or another, but I can definitely do that and get back to you, Bob. If you can track down who that's coming from, we can respond to them.
I will do that, and I will get the person to you, Paul.
Perfect, perfect.
Another question. The umbrella policy applies above the coverage limits of this policy. I'm not sure the context of the question. The question itself says the umbrella policy applies above the coverage limits of this policy. Does that make sense to you, Paul?
Yes, it makes sense, but the answer is it's incorrect. So these are standalone placements. And if you look at our umbrella policy, which every insured who's insured with church insurance has at least $1 million umbrella, what the question's related to is what an umbrella does is it extends your liability coverage for things that are covered in the package policy. Okay? These two things are not covered in the package policy, therefore would not extend under the umbrella. These are standalone placements, and the limit is the limit that we have. Now, with regard to cyber liability, like I said, the biggest claim we've had so far is a little north of 100,000. We have a 250 limit, but we do have access for anyone that's interested to excess cyber liability, where you could buy another 750,000. So for a person that's interested in maybe some sort of liability umbrella for cyber liability, the way we would answer it is through excess cyber. And the rate on that currently, now this is volatile, so it's subject to change, but the current street rate for that is about $1,000 a year to buy the extra 750, which would give you a total of $1 million. So I hope that answers that person's question. And if not, please forward them to me and we can have a conversation.
Thank you, Paul. Next question. In my religious order, sisters have credit cards in their own names. Would it be preferable for us to use credit cards in the name of the order? If a case of credit card fraud, if not resolved through the credit card company, would it fall under our insurance?
Yes, yes. So that would help clarify who the insured is. So it's always better if the card's in the name of the entity.
Thank you.
And that goes for renting cars and things like that as well. You know, you go out to rent a car. This is off topic. You go out to rent a car and you present a credit card that says Church Pension Group Services. That's really clear as to who's renting that car and who the named insured would be under any kind of policy you would buy at the counter. So lots of good reasons to do that.
Okay. A question is asked, Paul, do you have training materials for staff and volunteers on best practices on the website?
Yes, we do. We have 6 pieces that that have been given to us by our product partner that are very, very good pieces that I don't believe they're on our website because they're not actually our material, but we've got their permission to share them. So if they want to reach out to me, or I can send these to you, Bob, and we can publish them to the group. But I have 6 cybersecurity training bulletins that I can share that cover the big 6 items.
Yeah, Paul, if you want to send those to me, then I will have them posted on the ARC webinar page. So if people go to hear the recording or download some of the handouts, they will be there.
Yep, I'll do it right after the call.
Great. Let's see, another question. Am I correct that all of the malicious attack criteria have to be met for a payout to happen?
That's correct.
So if I go up,
right,
right, all of these have to be, you have to check off each one of them.
And to clarify, for it to trigger this policy, so let's think about this a little broader. Let's say it doesn't fit all 4 of these. Let's just say someone goes into a church, lights a fire, and harms people and property, but they're not tied to a group. They didn't use a vehicle. It wasn't a bomb or a handheld weapon. It was something other than that. the commercial general liability policy would not exclude that, meaning there's coverage in our policy. What malicious attack does is it just creates a subset that says, if it's this, then we can provide this. And the main bullets of that is the counseling and all that PR stuff that they're giving you. So this isn't where you don't have coverage. It's just whether you have coverage under this policy or if that coverage would possibly be under your commercial general liability policy with church insurance. I hope that helps clarify it.
Good, thank you. The next question has to do with presentation is really good. I work for a very small parish and we're not really doing much, and asked if there are materials that they could have to better enable them to protect themselves. Would those handouts that you're sending to me, Paul, would that take care of it, checklists and that sort of thing?
That would take care of it. Also, they could view this webinar, have the vestry view the webinar. The other thing they can always do is reach out to their regional vice president, who can set up a Zoom conference call currently. And when we get into the fourth quarter of this year, we'll be back on the road, we anticipate, so we could actually get back to face-to-face meetings. But you've got lots of resources, whether it's printed material, watching a webinar, or actually having a regional VP come out and speak to your group.
And if you're wondering who your regional representative may be, if you go to the Administrators Resource Center, ARC, one of the options is who to call. And in that, you will see CIC, and you will see a listing of all of their field representatives and vice presidents. Great. I represent a large parish where our diocese provides the insurance coverage. If we have a claim, do we deal directly with CIC or do we go through the diocese?
So just to clarify, the diocese is providing coverage for this parish, but that coverage is with church insurance?
Richard, if you could clarify a little bit, but the question does say, I represent a large parish where our diocese provides the insurance coverage.
Okay, so assuming that's it, where the diocese is insured this parish through church insurance, you would probably want to work through the diocese since that's the way you're purchasing. But we just really, our main concern is someone reports the claim as soon as possible, so that we can take care of it. We're always going to work with the named insured. So to the effect that you're a named insured on that policy, we're more than willing to work with you. But in that setup, you'd probably want to loop in the diocese since they're making the purchase of the policy.
Good, thank you. Next question, did I hear correctly that cyber and malicious attack liability coverage is already included in any diocese or church insured with church insurance?
Yep, that's true. And I want to clarify it. So what we're saying is if you have a commercial liability, property liability package with church insurance, you automatically get these two coverages, which are standalone placements through Lloyd's of London. You receive a certificate each year from our office that you want to keep in your file. But yes, if you're insured with church insurance for property and casualty, you automatically have these two products, no charge to you.
Good. Very good.
Yeah, that's the best.
Next question. I'm new to church insurance. Do the regional representatives conduct an annual insurance needs review with the insured entity?
We do it a couple ways. Most of what we do is through our marketing and risk management specialists. So we have a unit that is set up, designed specifically to do what's called a renewal review. And we do that with each client. We do it every 3 years. So there's about 5,900 insureds across the system. And we touch about a third of them a year. And what we do is it's an outbound situation where we'll call. We'll typically get the parish administrator, the person that knows the information. We'll verify that everything on the policy is still correct. We'll ask questions about anything that's changed related to exposures or buildings you have or buildings you no longer have, risks you have that you no longer have, whether you have a school. We'll run through all that stuff. It's every 3 years, and that's routine. Now, anytime you want to do a needs assessment, we can do one on demand, and that would be through your regional VP. Just reach out to them, find a time that works for both of you. Right now, like I said, we're doing most of it through Zoom. We're not traveling at this point, but hopefully in the near future, we'll be back out there and do some face-to-face. But I think one thing the pandemic has really proven to everyone is we can get a lot done over Zoom too. So you don't have to wait till Paul's back in Florida if you want me to meet with your vestry. So yeah, we're available on demand, but we also have it built in as part of a routine that we complete every 3 years. It also includes updating the value of your building, making sure that we've got the limits correct on the building, everything that we need to make sure that if the bad thing happens to you, that you have the right limits and the right coverage in place.
Thank you, Paul. I do see a hand raised. So Alex, I'm going to unmute you if you have a verbal. Oh, Alex, you may be muted yourself. If you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself. It says that you are self-muted, and you've lowered your hand. So maybe you're like me, you just like to click buttons sometimes and to see what happens. And all right, next written question. What's your recommendation for storing personnel files on a computer? Do you have any standard recommendations for that?
The best practice is generally going to be today. It's generally going to be cloud-based. I don't know that I have the expertise to give you best practice on that. I would probably direct you to whoever handles IT for your diocese. Diocese is typically going to have best practice around how they want to see that handled. But generally what I do see is it's cloud-based, very little in paper files anymore. Things like that, which again, now that it's cloud-based, we have to really be concerned about cyber. You can make the argument that, boy, the paper file was pretty safe. Unless someone stole it, you were in good shape. But generally what you see, whether it's a vendor doing it for you or you're doing it, generally these things are in the cloud or on your drive somewhere. But I would check with the diocese.
Thank you, Paul. I do have another hand raised. Glenda, do you have a Glenda? Do you have a,
Oh, yeah, I'm good now.
You're good. Okay, thank you. I don't have any more questions, Paul. I just a last opportunity to ask any questions. Do any of you have any additional questions? I see no hands raised. I see no additional questions in the questions window. Yeah, just one more. Here we go. Is it possible to get a breakdown by building, property, and premium, regular commercial liability insurance?
Sure. This sounds like somebody just wants to know what is charged to each building for property and liability. Yes, that's something that you can do. We can just call the 800 number. You'll get your client representative, let them know what you're looking for, but we provide that to folks from time to time. A lot of times if somebody's doing a pass through of an expense, maybe they've got someone renting their building, they want to pass through some of that, they'll ask for that kind of detail, and it's something we're prepared to give you.
Great. That's good. Any last minute questions? All right. As is typical in these kinds of things, we do have a very quick survey that we're going to ask you to take as you leave this webinar. It will pop up on your screen. There are just 4 questions, and all you have to do is a couple clicks and add some text if you want to. But we really do take seriously what you tell us and how you rate us, and we do change according to your input. So please take care of that. Once again, Paul, thank you to you and to Steve and all the people at Church Insurance Companies for this information and for all your work to protect us. And we would like to thank all of you who participated today. We know that your time is valuable, and we hope this information was helpful to you. Again, a recording of this webinar, a PDF of this deck, and the 6 documents that Paul is going to email to me, we will post up in the Administrators Resource Center in the webinar page. Please give us a couple days to get everything up. but it will be there. And Paul, this concludes this webinar.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you everyone for your time today. I hope it was helpful, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you need anything related to property and casualty.
Paul, there was just one more question came in, and I think this is a good one.
Okay.
In the case of ransomware, does Church Insurance hold our hand through the process?
Church Insurance doesn't, but the experts at Lloyd's of London certainly do. And that's a good question, because one thing folks forget is like, okay, we've heard it, we've went to the webinar, but when it happens, what do you do? The first thing you need to do is unplug that machine, okay? Unplug it, get off the network, and then the second thing you do is call us. We're going to put you in touch with the experts who are going to generally, like I said, they'll unhack the hack, and then we'll start looking at what's required in terms of notifications, if anything. Are there public relations impacts that we need to consider? But first and foremost, unplug that machine and call us.
Great. Thank you once again, Paul.
You're welcome.
And everyone have a good day. This concludes the webinar.
Thank you.